Do you want to know what the real problem is with our youth? Listen up. As a guy on the pro-gun side of things, the pro-Second Amendment side of things, I get a little bit exhausted of people on the left and the anti-gunners constantly coming at us asking about common sense, gun control, and expecting me to buy into that. I'm more concerned with all violence. I'm more concerned with the guy that wants to bash my head in with a hammer or cut me with a knife, or my family. I'm just as concerned with that type of violence. I don't segment it out of one to fit a political agenda out there like the left is doing. Because again, if they were concerned with everybody who was getting killed and everybody who was getting beat up and injured, they would care about knives and hammers. They don't. Guns fit their narrative, and that's the only reason why they bring it up. What I did is I did a lot of extensive research. What I did find was there are 3 categories that I see that are contributing to our youth having issues at a very young age and moving on into adulthood. I will try to be as quick and not as long-winded as I usually am, but I'm gonna throw a lot of numbers at you, and a lot of these numbers are extremely important. So I may run through this pretty quick, but I'm hoping that the numbers will stick with you guys and you'll understand what I'm talking about. The first thing I want to point out, bullying. Bullying of our children in America. Bullying. Okay, bullying. 1 in 4 of our children in the United States have been bullied or are being bullied. 1 in 4. 28% of children between 6th grade and 12th grade have been bullied. 20% of children between 9th grade and 12th grade have been bullied. That's huge numbers. Again, we're talking about 1 in 5 and 1 in 4 children in middle school and high school ages who are being bullied. 70.4% of staffs at schools have witnessed bullying taking place. 62% of staff members at schools say they've seen bullying at least twice a week, and 41% of staff members at schools say they see bullying at least once a week. The reason why it's important to point out the school staff is because most bullying, almost all of it, takes place either in schools, on school grounds, or on school buses. The really sad thing that makes you really look at these children and the burden that these children are carrying around is that only 20% of children who are bullied report it. 20%. 1 in 5 kids who are bullied report it. That means 4 out of 5 kids who are bullied don't say a word to anybody because they're embarrassed. They don't say it to parents. They don't say it to their own school friends. They don't say it to teachers, counselors, principals, anybody like that. That's 80% of children who are bullied are carrying that weight around with them with no one to talk to about it. Nobody to vent. Nobody, for lack of a better term, nobody's shoulder to cry on. They have nobody to talk to about it because, again, they're ashamed in many cases. They're carrying that weight around with them. Now, we'll look at it this way. This circle right here, these are the kids who are being bullied. Again, let's say ages between 6 and 12, grade school years or grade years, 28% of children that are in school are being bullied. Now, this next topic might be a little bit tough for some people to listen to talk about, and I'm not trying to belittle anybody or talk down to anybody out there that's truly trying to do their best. But 43% of U.S. children are growing up in fatherless homes. A home where the dad is not present, is not living in the home. 43% of U.S. children. Did you realize the number was that high? I did not. Now, those numbers get creepily worse, much worse, and scary. 85% of children with behavior disorders are growing up in fatherless homes. 71% of high school dropouts are growing up in fatherless homes, and it gets uglier. It gets much uglier. 75% of children in chemical abuse centers are coming from fatherless homes. 80%, this is where it gets ugly, 80% of rapists grew up in a fatherless home. Not a home without a mom. They grew up in a fatherless home with no father figure around. 63% of children who commit suicide come from a fatherless home. That is scary. And lastly, 70% of youth in a state-operated institution come from a fatherless home. Guys, those are numbers you just can't ignore. You can't sit back and say, that's a coincidence. It's not a coincidence. These kids are growing up without that firm father figure, and believe me, I grew up in a home with a very firm mom. My mom ruled the roost in our house. My dad was there. My dad was present. But my mom is the one that cracked the whip, so to speak. When Dad came home, we were in trouble. We're like, oh, Dad's home. When Mom came home, we were in trouble. We ran and hid. So I'm not saying mothers are not capable. It's what, now, granted, it's got to be a father who's actually around. You can't just live there and never be there. I'm assuming that you need to actually interact with your children. But dads bring something to the table. And obviously, a lot of these numbers, these negative numbers, these are mostly boys. A lot of these are not girls. I don't have those numbers broken down by gender. I assume there's still two genders, but I don't have them broken down by that. But you know most of these numbers are boys. Boys need that father figure in that home. All right, we're going to look at it this way. We're going to draw our circle like this, and this is fatherless. Oops. I had a lot of trouble writing today, a whole lot of trouble writing. Fatherless homes. It's right here. Okay, guys. Let's move on to the next one, and quite possibly the most alarming and clearly the most eye-opening to me. It's overly medicated children, or medicated children in general. A 2014 study showed that children I'm talking about infants, 0 to 17, 8.3 million children between the ages of 0 and 17 were on some form of psychiatric drug. Children ages 0 to 5, you want to know how many of those kids were on drugs? 0 to 5. Infant to 5 years old, 1 million children up to 5 years of age were on some form of psychiatric drug. Kids ages 6 to 12, 4.1 million. Now, kids ages 13 to 17, that's 3.6 million. 3.6 million. So again, all these numbers, these three different age groups, all account for 8.3 million kids who were on some form of drug, psychiatric drug. Now, a lot of these drugs are ADHD type drugs. They're stimulants and types of drugs like that. Oh gosh, Ritalin, Focalin, Adderall, and Dexedrine. Those are most of the drugs. However, there are obviously other drugs, psychotropic type drugs and things of that nature. A pretty telling stat for me, between the years of 2003 and 2007, ADHD drug diagnoses went from 10% to 15.3%. It had a 53% rise in only 4 years. Now, you might be thinking, why is that? Okay, that was what, 2003 I said? One thing that happened in 2003, George Bush had the No Child Left Behind program that went into effect. What that essentially did is it rewarded schools basically for passing kids, for better test scores. It gave them rewards. Now, what does that do? You know what it does. Anytime you throw money at somebody, you know what that does. It incentivizes people to maybe either look the other way whenever they probably should be looking that way. I won't say they fudge the test scores, but maybe, just maybe, if they have a kid who's functioning poorly, they say, your kid is ADHD. He needs some medicine. A lot of these parents look at school teachers, unfortunately, as if they are the pros. And I say that unfortunately because I do not think teachers, any of them, are qualified to determine if a child needs to be on drugs or not. That's not their background. There's zero education in a teacher's background that qualifies them to tell you that your child needs some form of medication. But they're doing it and parents are listening. Now, by 2012, this epidemic of medicating these kids had grown and grown and grown till now it had blossomed into a $10.4 billion industry. You don't think somebody's getting rich off of medicating our kids? You don't think there's an incentive somewhere for our kids being overly medicated? For as many kids as you possibly can get to take this medication? For as many kids as you can, not caring about the kids because their brains are still developing. The parents are not being told about the potential side effects, the bad side effects. We're talking about all these other kind of mild side effects that don't seem bad, like grogginess, staring off into space. They're not telling you that there's some potentially suicidal tendencies that come along with this. Obviously, horrible depression, but suicide as well. They're not telling you these things. You never sit down and a doctor goes, hey, you know, I'm going to give your son this ADHD medication, but just so you know, there's a good chance he could be suicidal if he takes this. Have any of you ever been told that by a doctor who was prescribing you medication for your child? Now, you want to talk about those test scores that supposedly No Child Left Behind was somehow we were going to medicate these kids and they were going to have better test scores. Somehow or another, that was going to be the miracle drug, no pun intended. In 2017, a study of 4,000 kids concluded that those who took stimulants did no better than those who did not. So we're medicating these kids for nothing. Yeah, the teachers are having a cakewalk because now little Johnny, who might have been a bubbly kid, and yeah, he might have smarted off a little bit. He may have had a couple little jokes that he'd like to tell and things like that. But little Johnny now is basically a vegetable in class. He does no better on his test, but guess what? Your day is a little bit better because now you don't have to call the principal. Now you don't have to tell Johnny to sit back down. Your day is a cakewalk now because Johnny's doped up over here and Johnny's not a problem anymore. The problem is some of these drugs are actually producing some of these side effects. In other words, you think, oh man, it's worse than I thought. You know, once he starts taking the medicine, these kids have all these other crazy side effects like the depressions and all that. And some parents and doctors and teachers are probably thinking, oh man, it was so much worse than we thought. Now he's depressed and he's suicidal. Thank God we put him on these drugs. He's acting like that because you put him on the drugs. The drugs are what's doing it. The drugs are what's making him depressed and suicidal and angry and agitated and aggressive. The drugs are doing that. Just read the small print, folks. Johnny wasn't like that before. And you know some other things that it does to these kids? When you tell a kid at an early age that something's wrong with you mentally, so we're going to medicate you, it does a couple of things. Number one, it hurts his self-confidence. Obviously, he wants to make mom and dad happy if dad's around, but it hurts his self-confidence. So he's knocked down a level. He's knocked down a notch. Again, it's hard being a kid, folks. So now you've hurt this kid's self-esteem. It also makes him realize at a very early age that drugs are good. Drugs are good, right? Because drugs are going to make him better. So you could say it's an indirect gateway drug to other drugs because now this kid thinks drugs are more acceptable. He certainly thinks pills are more acceptable. So when Bad Billy over here gives Johnny a pill now, it doesn't seem like that big of a deal to throw it in your mouth and take it. It just doesn't. I mean, it's true. It's a fact. But it makes Johnny also feel like nothing he does is his fault. It makes him feel like, it was the ADHD. I had a really bad ADHD day today, Mom. I did some really stupid stuff, but not my problem. Remember, I'm diagnosed with ADHD or whatever else. I'm diagnosed with depression. I'm diagnosed with being bipolar. So I don't have any responsibility for my own actions. The things I do, not my fault. This is not my fault, Mom. I was really bipolar today. Really bipolar. So I went and shot a cat. My bad. Hope to not do it again, but it's not my fault. Give me another pill. Another thing it kind of does, and we see a lot of it, and this is probably going to really tick some people off. I'm going to say it anyway. Parents. It absolves them of any real responsibility because, hey, my kid's flawed. My kid's flawed. My kid has all these issues. It's not my problem. It's my problem, but it's not my problem. I didn't create this problem, and there's nothing I can do about it. I'm sorry. My hands are tied. And the last thing it does, and I guess this is kind of a crossover between parents and teachers. Teachers, and again, parents, don't teach discipline anymore because, oh well, little Johnny's acting up over there. He's ADHD. Nothing I can do about it. No sense in me punishing him. No sense in me putting him in a corner, sending him to detention or whatever because poor little Johnny's medicated. So you don't teach that discipline anymore. You're not hard on these kids when they need to be hard on these kids. Some kids are screaming for you to be hard on them. Obviously, the kid that shot the place up in the school up in Florida, he was screaming from a mountaintop, somebody help me, and nobody helped him. And all these things applied to that kid, by the way. All these things we're talking about. So, let's do this. Let's draw this right here. Man, I'm so sorry for my handwriting. Medicated kids. Medicated kids. Okay, guys. So, We've got our kids who are being bullied here. We've got our fatherless kids over here. We've got our medicated kids over here. Let me show you something. You want to see where your mass killers are? There's your mass killers. That's your mass killers right there. You find a way to address these three things right here, and you will pretty much take care of mass shootings. I'm not talking about just the kids who are doing it. These people are growing up to be adults, and they're carrying all this with them. They're carrying the anger of being bullied. 28%, over 1 in 4 kids being bullied. Again, only 20% are reporting that. 80% are carrying that weight and that baggage and that anger with them for the rest of their lives. It doesn't stop when they turn 18 or 19 years old and leave high school. They carry that with them. They're from fatherless homes. All those things we talked about, they're there also. They're probably medicated on top of that, folks. All these things playing in together. And the people out there want to blame a gun? Don't ever use the phrase common sense to my face if you're bringing up banning or limiting firearms if you're not addressing this first.